What's up, guys, and welcome to Retcon Air, the Plotline Repair Podcast. Like the name suggests, this is a podcast that takes a look at the plotlines of books, movies, video games, and even Broadway shows. What we do is we break down who wrote the story, how it was received by the community, and how it impacted us. We also take a walk through the main moments of each story and wrap up by adding what we might do differently if we had the chance to repair a piece of the plotline that might make the story hit a little bit harder. And new this week, we'll read some of your suggested changes to the story. Now, we know it's a hell of a lot of ground to cover, so in the show notes, you'll find a table of contents with time codes to serve as a guide for each episode of Retcon Air. Now, just because we cover comments and criticism and even offer our own ideas as a Plotline Repair podcast, that doesn't mean we don't absolutely love these pieces of work. We do, and we love having this chance to talk about them with you. So, if that sounds good to you, stick around as we break down Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So today, I am joined by the incredibly gracious Shelby Fitch. Shelby, I actually got to see you and Briar in person this weekend, so you could give us a ton of baby boy clothes for a kid, and honestly, Danny literally just showed me the dresser and like everything that's hung up. You gave us so much stuff, like we're so ready for Parker to get here.
Oh, yay, I'm so glad.
So yeah, I was really excited to see you. I had a great time with you and Briar, but I'm really excited to do this episode with you, man.
Yeah, me too. You know, we were really happy to see you guys, and I'm really excited to talk about Star Wars.
Heck yeah. So let's do this.
All right.
So there's a new section we've been doing called the Armory. And that's something that we wanted to do just to kind of show everybody like what we're either reading or what we're playing or what we're watching. So Shelby, what are you into right now?
I am in the middle of reading a novel called Ramses the Damned. It was written by Anne Rice and I believe her husband. It's super mummy-esque but with a different twist. I've been obsessed with everything Egypt from the time I was a young girl. And I once even spent my book fair money on a how-to book on learning how to read and write hieroglyphics.
That's really cool. So do you still know how to do that?
No, I wish, man.
All right. Well, I mean, it's never too late to learn again, I guess.
Yeah, I'm totally going to again.
Well, and so Egyptian lore is really cool, and like Assassin's Creed Origins, I know Briar's obsessed with Assassin's Creed. Did you watch him play Origins?
I watched a little bit of it, but I purposefully kind of stayed away from it because I knew it was set in Egypt.
Okay.
And I'd like to play it.
Okay, yeah, so I was going to say, I didn't know if you were that into Assassin's Creed in general, but like...
Yes.
At its core, those games are so historically, like, amazing at, like, you know, recreation of, like, structures and, like, the blueprints of the city and kind of what the time and period was. So, like, in this one... I don't even want to spoil it. I don't know, I guess if you already read it. There's a character that you get to meet in there.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, you get to meet Cleopatra, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And it's like this little part of a story, and it's a much, much bigger story than that. But there's so many cool little things like that that I think you would just, from a history nerd standpoint, have a blast playing that game.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah. And like if you're not that dialed into like the entire world, and if you're not like into just going hardcore and completing the entire thing, you could like scale down the difficulty probably and just breeze through it and just really enjoy like the architecture and the story and like run around. So the combat in it's awesome. It's a lot less button mashy as it used to be.
Oh really?
They switched it to like hitbox style, so it's much more open RPG style.
Oh,
and it got
okay.
a lot of flack for that, but like it's still worth you playing through for sure. Just
sure,
because I didn't know that hippos were so lethal and gosh.
I remember Brian saying that.
Gosh darn, are they dangerous? Like those Jumanji movies have been like shitting on hippos pretty hardcore. But then when I was playing that game, I was like, why am I getting hunted by crocodiles and hippopotamus? Like it is very, very confusing. So anyway.
What have you been into, though?
So I just finished The Last of Us Part 2. I will not go anywhere near spoilers, but I will say that there's a moment in this game that was by far one of the most painful experiences of my entire gaming career.
What?
And that's since 1989. And it's insane because there's been so much controversy on the game, like as far as like the contents in it and like what people thought the game had either should have been about or what they didn't like about what Naughty Dog and Neil Druckmann and his team kind of put into the game. Mm-hmm. Ellie is gay, and there's another character in this game that's trans. And for some reason, people are so frustrated with that I think that a lot of people are really missing out on how incredible of a game this really is. And if you play the first one, you have a really strong connection to that world. And then if you play the second one, it does dovetail off of that and expand on it in like every way possible, and then really just challenge you. Like, it gives you very specific feelings, and then it makes you challenge those feelings the rest of the time. And I don't think I've ever experienced that before. So
wow, yeah, that sounds intense.
yeah, it is. Like, it's one of the most brutal built worlds I think I've ever played in, and it's one of the most painful storylines I've ever been forced. And that's the thing, like, sometimes you play a game like Overwatch, or you play like a fun game like Rocket League, and you might get frustrated, but at the end of the day, you're having fun playing this game.
Yep.
The Last of Us and The Last of Us Part 2 are the first few games where it's not fun. Like, it's engaging. It's so well designed. Some of the hand-to-hand combat is just really dialed in, and like the crafting and the stuff in the world and whatever, like all that, the game side of it's interesting. But you, like, at no point you're like, man, I just feel great, or like, this is just, like, there's a moment where I had to put the game down and I didn't play it for the rest of the night, and then I just needed time just to not play the game for a second because it was just so viscerally painful. And like, if you watch a movie and you literally hate an actor because of what they did, that means that actor did an outstanding job.
Absolutely.
A lot of the voice actors have been getting a ton of grief online. So specifically Troy Baker as Joel, Ashley Johnson as Ellie, Laura Bailey as Abby, and then Shannon Woodward as Dina. And then this new character, Lev, who's played by Ian Alexander. They've been getting so much hate. And to me, if you can hate somebody based on their performance, that's a testament to how incredible that person is as an actor. And that's a good thing. And now you might not like the storyline, but the fact that people are sending death threats to these people over the story that was delivered is absolutely bonkers.
Death threats?
This woman, like, she's a wife, she's a mom, she's a worker, and she's just doing her job, and she did it so well, following the narrative and the story that Naughty Dog created, that she posted all these screenshots of this person who's just going ballistic and how she should die and how ridiculous she is, and like, first of all, where do you get off in general talking like that to anybody? And then let's go a step further. What? Like, this is a video game that you're talking about. It's a fancier version of Pong. And I don't give a shit what pushback you're going to give me for that, but like, that's exactly what this is. And it just doesn't compute to, in the last episode we did the Spider-Man game for PlayStation 4, Briar and I did, and we talked a lot about we called it the 2019 Tobey Maguire fire, where people were outraged over DLC and they were making death threats to the developers of Insomniac over a video game. The cancel culture and like the toxicity is getting completely out of control. And so there's rightfully a lot of outrage on, in defense of them. Oh my gosh. And like the writers and like the voice actors in general of just like defense of like, you just don't treat people like that. So I can't stand shit like that. I really think that entire spectrum of conversation really soiled what would have been an outstanding conversation about representation and a really beautiful storyline and really engaging dynamic emotional moments and all of this other stuff that people are missing out on just because they didn't like that it wasn't a straight person with another straight person. Like, I just hate it. I hate it a lot. Anyway, enough about The Last of Us Part 2 and the ridiculous community of fans. We're here to talk about Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, and their ridiculous fans. So,
yep, we sure are.
So why don't we move on to Writer's Room and discuss who wrote and contributed to the piece.
So George Lucas himself wrote the story and screenplay for Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, deciding that since CGI, computer-generated imagery, had finally advanced to the level he wanted for the prequel trilogy, he could finally create the type of Star Wars movie he could only dream about back in the day. Production started in 1999, a full 22 years after he released the original Star Wars in 1977. So needless to say, cinematic technology advanced quite a bit.
And the fact that he could just chill on Skywalker Ranch and dream up his stories while riding on the success of the first 3 films speaks to the staying power of that project. Yes. I mean, like, you and I talk a lot about like the projects that we're working on and the stuff that we'd like to do one day. In the concept of writing something and having it, be created and become a physical thing, and then for it to be so successful on its own that it can sustain you for 22 years.
It's insane.
It's insane. Yeah. George Lucas didn't have to do anything for 22 years. No. And he definitely did, but he could have just chilled out.
Right.
But, he's doing pet projects and just living the dream. And
absolutely.
Man, pretty sweet.
Yeah. So anyway, Star Wars for the first 3 decades was driven by the vision of no one other than George Lucas. He knocked out the original trilogy and the prequels. As Disney acquired the rights to LucasArts and Lucasfilms, Star Wars movies, shows, and video games would utilize all kinds of writers. So as we break down other movies and properties, like the one you and I did with Rogue One, we'll have a lot more writers to talk about.
For sure.
That being said, let's get into our Deep Impact segment, where we break down how we and the community reacted to the flick. Spoilers, it didn't go great.
It did not go great. And so I get to take the top positive comment that we pulled. It was written by GabHug and says, quote, "It was great, very fun to watch, and the visuals have aged very nicely. The Star Wars fans are insane and expected the same old. So when they introduced all these new locations and characters, they were shocked. Jar Jar is still a failed attempt as the humorous sidekick, but it's really not a big deal. The pod racing sequence is amazing." And now I totally agree with the fact that Jar Jar was completely mishandled. I've read a bunch of cool stories about Jar Jar being a Sith Lord, and those are conversations for another time. And yeah, for sure, the pod racing sequence was pretty dope. There's just some weird stuff in the movie that just didn't 100% set well with me, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So what
Sure.
about the negative review?
So I found this one on Rotten Tomatoes. It's definitely not the lowest or worst review. There's some terrible ones out there, but this is one I wanted to talk about. So the website ranked this movie at 53% rotten, and the crowd didn't rank it much better at 59%. The critics' consensus was, quote, "Burdened by exposition and populated with stock characters, The Phantom Menace gets the Star Wars prequels off to a bumpy, albeit visually dazzling start," end quote.
I mean, dazzling is it's just fun to say.
It is dazzling. Now, Devin, I don't know about you, but I personally didn't get this when I was a young girl watching it for the first time. The movie was my introduction to Star Wars, and I was completely blown away and drawn into the world that Lucas had created in this movie.
For sure.
I watched it and I expressed my interest to my father, who was more than happy to share the older movies with me. And it started this really cool bonding experience where we would go around to all kinds of old toy stores to look for the action figures from the original trilogy and then the new movies as well. Now that I'm older, I understand the critics' comments a little bit more, but it's still just so nostalgic for me.
Now, before I get into me, what did your dad think about the prequel specifically?
Oh, he loved it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Was it like the story and the cinematography and the CGI stuff, or did he like that he was doing that with you?
So I guess that's something I've never really talked to him about. I'd have to say it was probably just that it was such a special bonding thing for us, because I think my dad always wanted a boy. So when I started to get into some of the, the not necessarily boy things, but things like Star Wars, he really got a chance to know me and bond with me in a way that he maybe hoped he could have with a boy.
Well, and then you told me before that you're the youngest by quite a bit of your other older siblings, and they were more into sports and stuff. So
yes,
I remember we were talking on the Harry Potter episode. You were talking about how they were just oh, there's Shelby and she's playing with her little stick wand and her little cape and she's just having fun or whatever. So I mean, I think very much you were probably the sci-fi geeky sister. Yes. But then now your dad has this opportunity oh, my other daughters aren't going to want to go watch Star Wars with me, but Shelby's all about this, so that's right. Cool. I really like that you had that with your dad. That's really cool.
Yeah, it definitely, this opened up a whole world for he and I, because he actually went to the Hobbit midnight releases with me when we would go watch them.
Nice. So
it just totally changed our relationship dynamic.
That's awesome. I love that, and that's what stuff like that should do. It and
yeah.
And so this the Skywalker saga, multiple generations of releases and stuff. So the prequels came out in 99, the originals were in 79, and then the new ones were late 2000s or the 220s, I guess, or 2019 was when the third one came out. So when did these start? 13, 14, somewhere around there?
Somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it's each generation kind of got their own, which was kind of cool about that. So
right.
I don't know, I like that. I like that there's a property strong enough to bring multiple generations of people together just as fans. That's what it should be, regardless
Absolutely.
of the hate and the nonsense. So that's cool. I love that. Good for you guys.
Thanks.
And so as for me, the first sci-fi flick I saw as a kid was a movie called The Last Starfighter. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
I would want you to ask your dad about it, because I wonder if he has.
Okay, I'll totally ask him.
I have a covert obsession with your dad, so interested in whether or not he's seen The Last Starfighter. But that's the movie that got me to sci-fi. Like, it was very awesome movie. You know, this boy who lives in a trailer park becomes awesome at this arcade game. What turns out is that there was this, you know, this interstellar group of aliens that hid these arcade machines all over the country, trying to see who would be the greatest at the game, because they were going to make that person the hero to fight their battle. So,
oh, cool.
So if you just imagine, every arcade game in the world is just a training ground for you to go to battle. So like, but this fascinating world and, you know, space and all this other stuff. And so that's what got me interested into sci-fi. And then I think as I was searching out other videos and other pieces of, you know, sci-fi stuff to check out, somebody, I don't know if it was my brother or I don't know if it was a friend of mine, I can't remember how it got introduced to me, but the original trilogy, that was, you know, hey, check these out, you know, I think you'll really like them. And I was enamored with it, with everything, with the world that George built, the stormtroopers, the Jedi, you know, everything about it was just fascinating, just like you thought. And then when they announced the prequels, I was like, holy shit, like, it's Star Wars for us. You know, Star Wars has definitely been like a thing from the 70s, and, you know, George Lucas is like this legend, and, you know, Spielberg, and that's how they got their start, and then did Indiana Jones and all this other stuff. And so there's like so much lore around it. And then when the prequels were announced, it was like, oh, holy shit. Like, now it's me and my friends get our own, and now this is what our parents probably went through and stuff. So it was really cool. But I remember going there, watching it, and just thinking, like, during that Duel of Fates scene between, like, Darth Maul and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn, I just remember thinking how incredible that fight was, and then how strangely over-polished everything looked.
Okay.
But I just think it was so... Because I didn't really know what I was expecting, I guess. And I was so used to, like, how old and decrepit and jacked up everything looked, that it was so weird to see all these things that were new and fancy and brand new and stuff, and it was weird. So so to me, it took me a while to really get used to and comfortable with the prequels as a whole. But ultimately, like, looking back now that I'm older, I love Liam Neeson, I love Ewan McGregor.
Yes.
And, like, overall, like, the movies aren't bad at all. I just think that we just needed to do a better job of, like, understanding what was going on. So So, yeah, you know, I mean, that's how I felt about it. So why don't we just talk about what's going on? Let's get into There and Back Again, where we walk through the story. And so do you want to run into the synopsis that I wrote earlier?
Sure.
I've been trying to find, like, really good synopsis, but, like, I can't, because they're so full of, like, you know, this person played by this person who's also in this movie, and this person played by this, and, like, nobody gives a shit about that. Like, they know who these actors are. So I've been trying to do my best here.
You've been doing a wonderful job.
Ah, so polite.
No, honest. Okay. 2 peacekeepers from the Galactic Republic, a Master Jedi and his apprentice, struggle to maintain order as the Trade Federation cuts off all routes to the planet Naboo. A local queen enlists the Jedi and his apprentice to help in investigating something far more sinister beneath the Trade Federation's actions. Along the way, an emergency landing for repairs on the desert planet Tatooine sets them on a collision course with a 9-year-old boy destined to change the universe. Let's get into the story. Want to start us off, Devin?
Yeah, how good was that synopsis, though? I did great.
That was beautiful.
I would watch that
awesome.
Movie for sure.
Heck yeah.
All right, so this movie opens with the classic, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. We get a little background to get us in the right mindset, and there's actually a lot of contention here, because the entire scroll is talking about all the turmoil, this trade federation, all these blockades and stuff.
Yep.
And so everybody's kind of freaking out about how the movie didn't feel right. And George Lucas said, like, oh, I made this movie for kids. And then everybody's like, this is a war over, like, a trade embargo. No kid understands what a trade federation is, what an embargo means, what the Galactic Republic could possibly be. Like, there's no way it was for kids. So I just remember at some point, like, when people were, like, flaming the movie, he, like, had just pitched that, I think, as kind of like a trying to save, like, no, you're just the audience wasn't right, and I just disagree.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
that doesn't feel right.
No. So the Trade Federation has stopped shipments to a small planet called Naboo. Congress does what it does best and debates, while the Supreme Chancellor makes the decision to secretly send 2 Jedi Knights to settle the conflict. The font fades, and we see a spacecraft flying towards a planet. A male voice instructs the pilot to tell the Trade Federation representative that they'd like to board their blockade immediately. 2 hooded figures are led to a room by a droid.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Classic.
So the hoods come off, and we see our 2 Jedi Knights, Padawan Obi-Wan and Master Qui-Gon. They chit-chat for a bit about how Obi-Wan is sensing something. It's like his spidey sense. The scene changes, and we see the droid telling the Trade Federation that the 2 ambassadors are actually Jedi Knights. The Trade Federation is not happy about that, and they send the droid back in. The Jedi obviously know something is up.
For sure. And it's all, like, that was really interesting, too, because, like, this movie did a lot of good jobs of setting up, like, the impact of, like, what somebody looks like. And they get so upset, like, well, if the Jedi are here, that they're coming to kill us. And that's not at all what the purpose of that mission was. So I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, not at all.
So the Trade Federation, while they're freaking out, that representative calls another hooded figure on their sweet hologram phones, very ahead of its time. The figure tells him to begin landing troops on Naboo immediately and also to kill the Jedi. Before the ship the Jedi had come on can raise their shields, a turret gun swivels and blasts them into oblivion. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan hear and stand raising their sabers. They notice poison being pumped into the room and hold their breath. The Trade Federation representative tells some battle droids outside the room that the Jedi must be dead, so they should go in and gather the bodies.
So, I didn't write this, but it's so funny to me because it's like seconds, maybe like 2 seconds after the gas is being pumped into the room, and they're like, oh, they must be dead. Like, what? How stupid are you?
It's wishful thinking, man. They're like, well, I don't want to fight them. You go in there.
But anyway, so I really like this. The droid walks out of the mist, the nice droid that's like C-3PO. And then all of a sudden you just see the 2 lightsabers glow. And I thought it was really cool. So the droids start shooting, but they're no match for the Jedi Knights. The Trade Federation is shaking in their boots, attempting to seal off the bridge. The sweet rolly droids show up while Qui-Gon is using his saber to melt through the blast doors to the bridge. I've always really, really loved the rolly droids, and I actually have a little figure of one of them.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, those are dope.
They're my favorite. Anyways, our Jedi use the ventilation shaft to move through the ship away from the droids. They notice the droid army that the Federation has on board and decide to split up to gather more information to send back to the Chancellor.
Back on the bridge, there's a transmission from the Queen of Naboo. She was pretty striking in her red, white, and gold. She claimed that the trade boycott had ended, stating that the Chancellor's ambassadors had arrived and the negotiations had been completed. The Viceroy of the Trade Federation plays dumb. I mean, he is dumb, but you know, and he pretends that he hasn't seen any ambassadors. After Queen Amidala leaves the chat, because that's pretty much what it is. After Queen Amidala leaves the chat, the Viceroy and his friends discuss the attack they are about to launch and decide they must interrupt all communication from the planet immediately.
Down on Naboo, we see Queen Amidala in a large stateroom surrounded by important people while a hologram speaks to her. It's Senator Palpatine, and he says he spoke with the Viceroy and knows that the ambassadors had arrived. He cuts out, conveniently. One of the men around her turns and states that there can only be one reason for a communication disruption: an attack.
No.
This seems like a big conclusion to jump to, but he isn't wrong. Queen Amidala doesn't want war, so for the time being, they decide to wait it out.
Back in space, a ship has left the Trade Federation blockade and is landing. Troops are unloading. We get to see Naboo and see Qui-Gon running straight into one of the natives of the planet. Good old Jar Jar Binks. Obi-Wan, running from a droid, finds Jar Jar and his master. With a little convincing, Jar Jar takes them down to the Gungan city, deep in the water. The Jedi use these awesome mini scuba things that allow them to breathe underwater, and they swim down to the fishbowl city. The trio are taken to the boss, as Jar Jar has been exiled from the city, and Obi-Wan explains the droid army is about to attack, but the boss says he doesn't like the Naboo. Couldn't care less. He's good.
Could not care less.
Solving my problem for me. And then Qui-Gon realizes they aren't getting anywhere, so he uses the Force to convince the boss to give them transport away from the city, through the planet's core.
That was perfect.
Thank you.
Gosh.
Thank you. Not rehearsed, you guys.
Okay, so Qui-Gon convinces the boss to let Jar Jar come with them, and they're off. A big fish sees their transport ship and comes after them. It sticks them with like a sucker tongue and tries to eat them, but it gets eaten by an even bigger fish, because there's always a bigger fish.
And hold on, before we go back to space. Bless you.
Sorry, yep, that was like a sneeze cough. It was weird. I don't know what happened.
Okay, so real quick, I wanna land for a second, like on Jar Jar. So
okay.
Jar Jar Binks, I think unrightfully probably got a ton of bad press, and you know we just had this whole conversation about The Last of Us and going after voice actors. Yep. So many people flame Jar Jar Binks that the guy who voiced him, Ahmed Best, suffered with depression for several years. I think he even attempted suicide a couple of times. He didn't have a good time at all because of the negative fan outrage to Jar Jar Binks. Now, I totally understand the fact that Jar Jar wasn't that easy to like. He was like annoying, and like if I was younger, I bet like if me and Charlie would have watched the Phantom Menace, it's a very war-driven movie, so I just don't think she's old enough for it. But sure. I bet you Charlie would love Jar Jar Binks. I think she would love it. I think that character is custom designed for like your kids or whatever.
Yeah, I loved it when I watched it. I mean, I loved him.
Totally makes sense. But like that, the character was so in everything that it's so distracted from everything else that was happening. It wasn't funny to me to see this guy who's constantly almost hurting people or like dropping bombs and doing all this other stuff. Like none of that was like funny to me. And so I totally get why, it just didn't sit right. But like Ahmed Best totally dedicated himself to that character, to the dialogue and the style and, even like the high pitchiness of his voice and stuff. Like every time I hear that, like I think of Sebastian from The Little Mermaid and like how perfect. Yeah. And like to me, Jar Jar Binks was done just as well. It was a very full out performance. It was consistent through all 3 episodes, and I think they used him way too much. But when he was in there, he went for it. So
that's what his voice acting like fit Jar Jar. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when they create characters and then have a human, obviously, voice them, it doesn't quite jive. And like Jar Jar was Jar Jar. Yeah,
he was kind of like this crazy version, but then even once you got to go down to this, incredibly visually stunning area, so we call it the fishbowl or whatever.
Yep.
But then as you're going down, like the cinematography and the CGI that created this awesome Gungan underwater civilization was phenomenal. It was really cool to see. And then even like the transports that they use and the creatures that they saw in the cave and all that stuff. Yep. But like the creature and the character of Jar Jar in contrast to all the other Gungans and stuff, like he didn't even really fit amongst his peers.
Right.
But the character of Jar Jar still worked for like that. And that was the thing. Like it was like one of those almost kill your darlings thing. It's like Jar Jar is so unique and kind of weird and super clumsy and like really annoying and like very aggravating and all that other stuff. It's like if you could have just written that character a little differently, it probably would have hit a lot better. And there was, like I said, this episode we're doing some community feedback, and there's a lot of commentary about like how they could have switched up Jar Jar a little bit. So I'm really looking forward to breaking that down a little bit later. So
yeah, definitely.
Anyway, let me apologize to you for cutting you off earlier, and you can go ahead and take us to space.
All right. Back in space, the Viceroy is talking to the hooded figure and explaining that the attack is underway. Underwater, the ship is losing power, but Obi-Wan hotwires it just in time to see this sweet eel with huge teeth about to chomp them. Ugh. They get away as, once again, there's always a bigger fish, and it eats the eel.
And like that whole sequence is nightmare fuel. Like
Oh my gosh.
Like just spending that much time like going through the core and like the bigger fish and then the even bigger fish and then the even you're like, no, I'm not into it at all.
I'm done. This is enough.
I'm not here for that at all. So down on Naboo, the attack is starting. Queen Amidala is sad, understandably. The Viceroy comes to see her. With perfect timing, the Jedi pop out of the water in their ship. The Viceroy is walking Queen Amidala, now dressed in black with some wicked feathers on her head because she's got some attire choices that would stop a train. And she says she won't cooperate, but threatens her people. And the Jedi watch on as they walk through the courtyard. Sabers ready, they drop down and attack the droids, freeing the Queen and her envoy. Qui-Gon explains that he must get word to the Chancellor, as the negotiations never took place with the Trade Federation. With the communications still down, they head to the hangar to attempt to get off the planet. Qui-Gon tries to convince Amidala to come with him. She decides to come along with her handmaid and guard, which makes sense. Mm-hmm. Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan battle the droids while the rest of the Queen's envoy get on the ship and they take off.
The Trade Federation blockade fires and hits the ship, but the droids immediately go to work to fix the shield generator. R2-D2 is the hero of the day and of my heart always.
Yeet. Yeah, R2 is the real MVP of the entire Skywalker saga.
Of everything. He's just the best.
Once upon a time, I read something cool that said like the entire the Skywalker saga was through the eyes of R2 because he's the only character that's been in everything, and I love that. I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah.
Aw. Okay. The ship gets through and decides they must land on Tatooine to repair the ship. On the Trade Federation ship, the Viceroy shakily admits to the hooded figure that Queen Amidala has disappeared, and one ship made it through the blockade.
Whoops.
An even more menacing figure steps up from behind the hooded figure. Dun dun dun.
Yes.
Darth Maul has been sent to find Queen Amidala to sign the treaty that would make the attack on Naboo legal.
Arguably the coolest Sith that's ever walked anywhere ever.
Listen,
So
we'll get into it later, but 100% the coolest Sith.
On Tatooine, we're treated to a look at what the Jedi Order is supposed to look like. We've got Qui-Gon Jinn assuming command while on a mission that takes place on a new planet outside of the Republic's control. We see him order Obi-Wan Kenobi to stay behind, both protecting the Queen and waiting for any transmission from the Jedi Council or the Chancellor. And we also see Qui-Gon get frustrated and tell the Queen's Guard and handmaid that he wasn't going to entertain any more orders for her from her today. So when the Phantom Menace was released, up until this point, the Jedi have been kind of like this secret group of people that, you know, were only whispered about, or there was more of like a legendary thing because the Empire controlled everything. So like you just didn't hear about Jedi anymore. So for me, it was really cool to see life as it was supposed to be, like during the Galactic Republic, where the Jedi were powerful, where they were respected, and on various planets that they traveled to, you know, they were able to do kind of whatever they wanted. And so like the concept of, you know, we know that this is a queen. We know the queen is saying, we want you to take the handmaid with you. And for Qui-Gon to be confident enough in his own station to say, like, you know what, no more orders from the queen today. Like,
Right.
that part struck me so hard when I rewatched it right before doing this episode, just because of how, like, to me, I was like, so that's what George was building. You know, like I was saying
Right.
earlier, the movie looks so over-polished considering how much older and junky everything else looked. But then it's like, this is when everything was pristine. This is when, you know, everything was starting to crumble. So you do see the Jedi Order when they're at their fullest strength. You do get to see all this other stuff when it's in its prime. And to me, like, that was just fascinating to see before it all fell apart. So, like, what did you think of the contrast between the chaos and, like, the old, you know, lookingness of the original trilogy, you know, versus the newness of Episode 1?
I remember, so like I said, I watched Phantom Menace first, and then I watched the original trilogy. And I was so confused because I started with the newness and, you know, the what Jedi should be. And then all of a sudden I was thrown into what they became.
Oh, yeah.
So that was really, really confusing to me. I couldn't figure out how they could have lost all that respect and all that trust. I compared the Jedi to my dad. I bring up my dad so much in this episode.
Cool.
He's been my hero since day one, and I felt like since he had been in the military, he was my own personal Jedi.
Neat.
And so I really liked the Phantom Menace because it was like seeing them at their height and how awesome they were and how respected they were. But anyways, back to the story. As you said, Qui-Gon is getting frustrated with how pushy the Queen is about the handmaid, but the handmaid and guards stand their ground and push back, causing Qui-Gon to give in and let her tag along to find replacement parts for the broken ship, which leads us into Chapter 2, The Boy on Tatooine.
Aw, yeah. So Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, R2, and the Queen's handmaid enter Mos Espa. Or Mos Espa? What? Do you know how the fuck to say that?
I have always said Mos Espa, but you do you.
Enter Mos Espa. I mean, after Durmstrang, I'm going to just take your advice on how to pronounce everything. So Qui-Gon, Jar Jar, R2, and the Queen's handmaid enter Mos Espa, where they find a shop that specializes in junk and parts for droids and spaceships. It's there we meet Watto, the shop owner who is playing all kinds of hardball with Qui-Gon about the price of the replacement parts. While in the shop, they also meet a small boy, Anakin Skywalker, who works as an indentured slave to Watto. He won Anakin and his mom Shmi in a bet against Gardula the Hutt. So all Anakin has ever known in his life is just being a slave. So Qui-Gon can sense the strong power of the Force within young Anakin, and also realizes that he's way too broke for the price it would be to repair the ship. You know, we've all been there. So what does he do, Shelby?
He makes a bet. Qui-Gon bets Watto that Anakin will win the forthcoming pod race. The winning results being that Qui-Gon would win the replacement parts for the ship and Anakin, so he could be taken to the Jedi Council. What do you think of that gamble?
I thought it was interesting to see how seriously Qui-Gon took it. Clearly, Qui-Gon has spent years and years pouring through Jedi training and undergoing mentorship and stuff. And so for him to see a boy that reminded him of this prophecy, this kid who's just apparently overly powerful and he's way stronger than he should be, and it's not like they have that much time together. Like when you watch it, they spend maybe a half a day together, really.
Yeah.
You know, maybe like 2 days max together or whatever. But nowhere near enough for them to really see anything more than his ability to build droids and like to race a podcast
right.
to race a podcast. For his ability to race in a pod race. That was where there was controversy about like the metachlorine count, because they get a sample of Anakin's blood and they send that back, and like there was a whole stupid thing and whatever else. But like, I don't know, it was weird. It was interesting, but it was cool to see how seriously that he took it, and enough to make that wager with Watto for him and the engine parts. Like there was so much trust there in Anakin, you know, this small 9-year-old boy's ability to beat all these other different species of racers and stuff. I loved it. I thought it was very cool. What'd you think?
This may be totally out there, but for me, I found that when people are in a position of respect and power, there are multiple paths that they can take. And this felt to me like the path of someone who has risen through the ranks, Qui-Gon, and he's gained a lot of power and respect, but he still wanted something to believe in outside of himself. Whether or not he actually knew Anakin was the chosen one, he wanted something to believe in, and he ran with it. And I think it's really, really great.
Interesting.
So Anakin, of course, goes on to win the race, but is sad AF when it dawns on him that he has to leave his mother behind.
Which I've never understood why Qui-Gon just didn't get both of them from Watto like he did from the Hutt. Because that's the thing. It's when Watto won, Shmi got Anakin as well. So they were a package deal. So I don't understand why it wasn't either. Anyway, whatever.
Yep.
Still plot points. It's fine. It's
totally fine. On the way back to the starship, Qui-Gon has his first encounter with the ultimate badass Sith of all time, Darth Maul. And
the two things that this movie absolutely nailed were Qui-Gon and Darth Maul. Everything about both characters was perfect. What did you think about them, though?
Yes. There are two characters who I think I will always be most impressed by. Qui-Gon was, as I mentioned, the perfect hero / father figure in my opinion. Absolutely. And he was written well to show his strengths, but also help us understand that even heroes have their limits. And I really thought that Liam filled the role perfectly.
Absolutely. I've watched that movie a bunch of times now, and I just don't know who else.
No.
Like, I love Pierce Brosnan, and like there's a bunch of older type characters who just have that mentorship ability, and I just don't think any of them could have done the kind of job that Liam did. Liam just did such a great job there.
I totally agree. And then with Darth Maul, it's controversial. I've never been a huge Vader or Palpatine fan. Something about like hiding themselves and their battle scenes are just kind of weird. I mean, Vader gets some good ones, but I don't know. But Darth Maul is a totally different story. From his first introduction to us, he's just the type of character that stands out and was written and portrayed so intimidatingly. As a child, I rarely ever found qualities in bad guys that made me want to know more about them. But Maul was somebody I always wanted to know more about, like how he got to where he was, what made him join the Sith, if he was always on that path, all that stuff.
Well, and you know what you just made me think of? Like, I wonder if, did you watch Black Panther?
No.
Okay, so Black Panther is great, and there's this awesome villain in there. There's a couple villains in there, but the lead one is this character called Warmonger. And it's this guy, he served in the military, he worked for the CIA as like this lead operative, he's got tons of kill counts, and there's an African kind of culture, it's called like scarring, so they have like these little, almost looks like blisters all over their body to symbolize each kill that they made, because they take it seriously and they like carry that with them. So there's a point where Michael B. Jordan, who plays Killmonger in the movie Black Panther, he takes off his shirt and his upper body is completely covered with these, blister looking scars, signifying that he's killed all these people. He's got like a ridiculous amount of kill counts and stuff. And I think what I just noticed while you were talking about the way that they built Darth Maul is I think that, Killmonger is very much an influenced style character, whatever, of what worked with Darth Maul, because Darth Maul was like very aggressive. He wasn't that into shadow. Yeah, he didn't talk. Sure. But like he was ready to go. He was riding motorcycle kind of things and like trying to tear people up and like rushing into battles. Like he was hungry for like the fight or whatever. And like Killmonger had that same thirst and hunger, and like he wanted to just roar, not to just like he didn't want to react. He wanted to be on the offensive and to attack. And stuff. And I think I love that. I think that's what makes a great villain is you have somebody that knows that they're bad, but maybe their motivations don't line up with what you think, but they feel feel justified on their
Yes.
own, and then they're still just so compelling. So like Darth Maul for sure, one of the greatest villains ever, and it wasn't until you broke it down how much I think he connected with like Warmonger.
Yeah,
a little bit.
very
So,
cool.
Interesting. So anyway, what happened in that first initial fight between Darth Maul and Qui-Gon Jinn?
It only lasts a few moments before Qui-Gon escapes on board the ship as it's taking off.
And so, bitch moved to run?
Multiple thoughts here. As a Jedi Master who's top-notch and literally one of the best that there were, maybe a bit of a weird play.
Yeah.
But as I mentioned earlier, I think the interesting part about Qui-Gon was that he was written and portrayed to show some maybe questionable decisions, some things that wouldn't be perfect hero worthy. They made him human. What do you think? Should he have ran?
I don't know. Like, Obi-Wan could have hopped off that ship and helped Qui-Gon whoop his ass. Like, but I mean, there's like a couple things that they could have changed and the story would have kind of cleaned itself up or whatever, but there's like, this felt like one of those things where they had to do it just to keep the movie going, and I didn't like that.
Sure.
Like, Obi-Wan could have easily hopped off, and they could have tag teamed him, and it would have been fine, and I don't know, it could have all just ended there. But still, it's a little early for plot holes there, George. Onward to Chapter 3, the Jedi's weird-ass rules. There's like a couple things that the Jedi take really firm stances on.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big reason that stuff goes sideways. But anyway, let's go ahead and have you start that off.
All right, so Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan escort Padme to Coruscant so that she can plead her people's case to Valorum and the Galactic Senate.
And again, just for clarification, Padme being the handmaid to the Queen.
Yes.
While Padme is doing her thing, Qui-Gon approaches the Jedi Council and asks for their permission to train Anakin as a Jedi. The Council refuses, concerned that Anakin is vulnerable to the dark side of the Force. Anakin would get used to the Council making decisions he didn't much care for, unfortunately. And the Council, while not incorrect in their assessment that Anakin was vulnerable to the dark side of the Force, in my opinion, definitely set in motion the chain of events that caused Anakin's fall to the dark side. And do you mind if we kind of stop here for a second?
Speak. Yo, truth.
Okay, so again, for my money, this is the moment right here that sets up the entire rest of the Skywalker saga. If the Council said yes, go ahead and leave him here. We're going to take him under our wing as a youngling and make sure that he's got a mentor for the rest of his life. I think he would have turned out fine.
Okay.
I read some other stuff online about how the fight between Qui-Gon and Darth Maul is one of the most important moments in the universe because it happened in what they call that whole sequence is the Duel of Fates. Dave Filoni, who wrote a ton of Star Wars content, is very much a grand wizard in Star Wars lore. He said that the reason the battle was called the Duel of the Fates was because whether or not Qui-Gon lived or died impacted the fate of Anakin, how he would be raised. Either he'd have Qui-Gon as a solid father figure to influence him, or he'd get Obi-Wan as more of a brother and a friend, as opposed to the father figure that he really needed for the guidance and the understanding. And like I've heard that a couple of times, and I just don't really agree with that necessarily, that Qui-Gon was the only person capable of doing it. I think it was this moment right here of the Jedi Council refusing to let the training happen is what made Anakin, go through the series of events that he went on to eventually fall. What do you think? What do you think about Anakin? Do you think he would have turned to the dark side anyway, regardless of who, raised him? Do you think it would have mattered if Qui-Gon lived or not? Do you think it would have mattered if he got to stay, maybe just on Tatooine? What if he never left that planet?
Sure.
What do you think of the that order of events?
So I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way, but I've always held the belief that while events can certainly change the way a person thinks or, push them one way or another, in the end, it's 100% up to each person to make their own path.
Absolutely.
And if you can't realize that and recognize that, that's an issue.
Yeah.
So obviously every situation is totally different, but I just don't know. I have to agree with you about the Qui-Gon living or dying thing. I think if he had had Qui-Gon as a mentor, it may have been okay, but he may have actually sped the process to the dark side along without meaning to, because Anakin would have had an even more, quote, perfect role model. And when he made small mistakes, as any Padawan would, he would have been even harder on himself and maybe become frustrated sooner. And also, can I just add, if he hadn't been trained as a Jedi, what did the Council think was going to happen to him? Did they think that he would just go back to Tatooine and live a normal life? I mean, Maul had seen the kid, right?
And maybe that's like the Council's position is like, hey, we're either you're with us or you're not. So we don't intervene unless we have to intervene and blah, blah. I don't know. like you said, this whole chapter is called the Jedi's weird ass rules because they just have these weird things about, like, you know, don't settle down, don't get married, don't get involved, don't you know, enjoy life. You know, there's like, it's almost like, you know, Catholicism, Catholic priest type of restrictions where, you know, you're not allowed to have a spouse whatsoever. You know, that thing is just off the table.
Right.
And then you have Anakin, who later on completely rebels and he seeks his own pleasure and his own heart and his own love and stuff like that.
Yep.
And it's like, all right, what if you would have completely remove that? What if he didn't have to marry in secret? What if they didn't have to hide their pregnancy?
Exactly.
How much other stuff could have happened if everybody wasn't trying to, you know, bend the rules? But then on the flip side, why is Anakin constantly breaking rules?
Right.
But then you have Qui-Gon Jinn, who's constantly breaking rules, and then you have the Chancellor, who's constantly. So it's, I don't know, it's
everybody's breaking the rules.
Everybody's breaking the rules. But anyway, all right, back to the Jedi Council. Qui-Gon pretty much tells them to get bent, and that he's going to take on Anakin as his apprentice anyway. They push back on him though, saying that, hey, Obi-Wan is already your apprentice, you can't have two. But then he said, Qui-Gon says, hey, Obi-Wan kicks ass. He's ready for the trials right now. And I do hope that we get to see what the Jedi Trials are like someday, because I don't think we've ever, in like the new trilogy, we got some like shots of like the training ground that Rey was kind of messing around with, but we never got to see like true Jedi training. Like, we saw the younglings for a second before they got fucking destroyed,
right?
but we never got to see like what Jedi training looks like, really. You know, you got Luke in that stupid laser ball, you got Rey in that stupid laser ball, but like, I just think there's so much potential for like seeing how Jedi are trained.
Yes, definitely.
So anyway, so Qui-Gon is fully competent that, you know, Obi-Wan can go through whatever these Jedi trials are, and so, you know, Obi-Wan can finally strike out on his own, and so that allows Qui-Gon to take Anakin on as his apprentice. So do you think that was cool of Qui-Gon, you know, to all of a sudden go, hey, it's time to leave the nest so I can take on Anakin? Or do you think that was like a selfish dick move because he wanted what he wanted, regardless of what may have been, you know, best for Obi-Wan?
So I'm torn, honestly. I think because of how Obi-Wan was introduced to us in this movie, he was looking to Qui-Gon for answers. You know, he was saying that he felt something and he wanted the reassurance from Qui-Gon. So I feel he possibly did still have some room to grow and learn with Qui-Gon, at least to a point where he could trust his own instincts instead of questioning them. Yeah. I think he held his own when he was forced to do so, though. So it's kind of
All right.
do you not like my answer?
You know what? I think if I were to kind of like sum up all of the reviews that I read about the movie, it would just, I could kind of compile it all to like, yeah, it's kind of, I like that. That's nice. So anyway, Queen Amidala grows more frustrated as she learns of the rampant corruption throughout the Galactic Senate. War is brewing between the Galactic Republic and the Trade Federation. With the help of Senator Palpatine's persuasion, a vote of no confidence is called since the current leadership in Valorum isn't able to maintain control over it. Rumors of a Sith Lord are circulating, leading Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan to escort Padme, the handmaid, to the leader of the Gungans, arguing and asking for their help on the Queen's behalf. Mm-hmm. But it's there that Padme reveals herself to be Queen
dun, dun, dun.
Amidala. Ooh, what a twist, as Breyer would say if he were here. And then so she, as the queen, you know, blowing the minds of everybody, asked for an alliance between the Gungans and the Naboo, I guess. Mm-hmm. And that leads us into Chapter 4, the 60-Year War.
The Gungans agree and promote Jar Jar to a general in his tribe's army in what would be the beginning of a war that would stretch for the next 67 years.
And so why 67 years?
From the moment Anakin Skywalker was discovered on Tatooine to the moment Emperor Palpatine takes his last raspy breath was a time span of 67 years.
Damn.
For real. So war is raging between the droids and the Gungans. Padme leads the hunt for Gunray, who she knows works for the Trade Federation and is leading this droid army against her and is an all-around a-hole.
Padme, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan end up fighting Darth Maul in the starship hangar. Qui-Gon tells Anakin to hide in the cockpit of the starfighter, which makes total sense. And of course, he accidentally triggers the autopilot, which of course takes him directly into the space battle taking place between the Trade Federation ships and Galactic Republic ships. Now, I don't question this at all, because if I put my daughter in the cockpit, she's turning that plane on, she's flying it. So I wasn't surprised at all. Was it smart that Qui-Gon did that?
No, not at all.
Did it totally make sense that the kid would just start pressing buttons. Yeah,
Yep,
absolutely.
100%. I totally agree. Oliver is in a button pressing stage right now. Watch out, buttons, because he's coming for you. So Anakin, being a naturally gifted pilot and one heck of a Jedi, kicks some serious space butt and ends up flying directly into the Trade Federation's hangar, destroying it, and then escaping unscathed. Now, while it sounds cool, it also deactivated the entire droid army that was fighting the Gungans. So needless to say, Anakin kicks some butt.
And while Boy Wonder is out there tearing those space dicks new assholes, there's also one of the greatest Jedi versus Sith battles that has ever taken place in the history of the Force. Now, it's totally not matched 2 versus 1, which I don't think is very cool, but Darth Maul is the worst and is all about killing people, so it makes sense that he needs to be stopped at all costs.
Yep. They engage in combat, both Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon fighting in their unique ways. Qui-Gon is reserved and patient, attacking when an opportunity presents itself and conserving his energy when it's not needed. Obi-Wan is definitely more aggressive, attacking more head-on and waiting impatiently to strike again.
The battle takes place to the backdrop of a song we mentioned earlier, the Duel of the Fates. And again, as David Filoni said, the purpose was that this battle shaped who Anakin Skywalker would become. Either he got a father figure or a brother. And he didn't need a brother, he needed a father. But unfortunately...
Darth Maul, using his kick butt red double-bladed lightsaber, pierces Qui-Gon mortally with his lightsaber. Enraged, Obi-Wan attacks, rallies, and cuts Darth Maul in half, sending him into a pit. Yep.
So what I have written here, you guys, is sending him into a pit like a little bitch boy. And so Shelby doesn't want to read that. There's actually been a lot more of that Shelby's just refusing to read. But I am impressed at your ability to just pivot for the most part. This is the first time you've been like, I don't know.
Yep, I didn't know what to put there.
That's totally fine. All right, you can keep going.
Okay. After slaying Darth Maul, Obi-Wan rushes to Qui-Gon's side. As his apprentice held him in his arms, Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn died, requesting that Anakin Skywalker be trained in the ways of the Force. It was his it was his last wish before he died.
And so, of course, Obi-Wan, being loyal to his master, the guy that trained him and believed in him enough to start his trials, takes on an apprentice, possibly the chosen one, the one from the prophecy that is supposed to bring balance to the Force, is just placed in the care of this cool young dude with zero experience on his own.
You okay, man?
No, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, I just don't know. There are a handful of things in the story that just didn't gel, and this was like a big one. And this is another reason why the Jedi Council should have stepped in and taken an Anakin. Yep. And like, also, why couldn't have Anakin just been older? It would have played better for a lot of reasons. And I don't know. Let's finish this up.
Yoda promotes Obi-Wan to the rank of Jedi Knight and reluctantly accepts Anakin as his apprentice.
As noted by his stupid little braid.
What do you have against the braid, man?
It's clearly a clip-on.
It's totally pointless. I don't get it.
So, like, you see how scruffy his Jake Lloyd's hair is throughout, whatever. It's fine. But then you see him in the final scene, and his head is completely shaved, and he's got this, like, 7-foot-long braid.
Whose hair is it?
So whose job is it to make these fake Jedi braids, and they're just issuing them out to people? And then, like, is there a standard in, like, how you clip it into your stupid hair? It's so ridiculous. It was ridiculous.
It is.
He could have just been standing there. Anyway.
Padme presents a gift to Boss Nass and the Gungans to establish peace. And that's a wrap on Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
So, as mentioned in the intro, today we're featuring a segment focused on what you would retcon in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. And so let's quickly breeze through some of these, and then we'll get to what we changed. Now, the resounding feedback was that people just didn't want Jar Jar Binks in this movie at all, and a lot of people just wrote, kill Jar Jar. But we did get some good input from this guy, Rick Nimrod, which, first of all, great name. Yep. Nimrod, fantastic album by Green Day, you should check out. But he writes, my constructive Jar Jar input. Kill Jar Jar is just silly fanboy rage that is unfocused. But if Jar Jar did at least one heroic act on purpose rather than bumbling into being a hero, I feel it would have changed perception of the character. But then again, The Phantom Menace is my favorite prequel, so I'm sure my opinion will be ridiculed. What do you think about that, Shelves?
Oh, I really like that. If he could have at least maybe thought to put some thought into trying to do something and like really done it right, one thing, then yeah, I think maybe he could have been looked at differently.
And so we were saying earlier, you as a kid really like Jar Jar. I know that my daughter would really, really like Jar Jar, but if you could rewrite that character and just make him more heroic and less like clumsy and stupid, like they said, if you did one thing on purpose, if instead of him like getting his foot stuck on a droid and accidentally killing everybody, what if he just went full Terminator for a second and just tore everybody up? What if the reason he was banished from his city was because there was a rebellion and he took the lead, and maybe he made a mistake and was a failure, and maybe this was his redemption story. Like there are so many cooler tracks that you could have done, and you could have left Ahmed Best's version of Jar Jar the same. Just stop making him so bumbling.
Right.
Less Clark Kent, more Superman-y. Like, let's just move that dial up a little bit. I think that would have helped a lot.
I totally agree.
All right, so why don't you take the next one?
Sure. So Jonathan Brothers wrote in and said something really cool about the Emperor. He writes, show when Palpatine kills Darth Plagueis, his master who, according to everything I've read, was still alive during most of the events of this movie.
Now, you don't know a whole lot about who Darth Plagueis is, which is fine.
Sorry, guys.
And just to spin you up real quick, I think it's in the third one, Revenge of the Sith, or maybe it's in the second one, I can't remember, but there's a point where the Chancellor Palpatine is talking to Anakin, and he's just saying, hey, have you heard about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? And then the Chancellor tells the story, of this dark Jedi who, used the dark side of the Force to be able to control even death so that his loved ones couldn't die. And, there's a point where Anakin starts having these nightmares about Padme dying, and he doesn't want to live without her, and he's freaking out. And the reason that's important is because this story of Darth Plagueis, of this powerful dark Lord Jedi, dark master guy, who's able to do all this stuff. So this guy is saying that, the story, according to the lore, there's only ever two Sith at one time. There's an apprentice and then a Sith Lord, the master and the apprentice. So the Sith Lord, the Maul, is always trying to seek power from, the Palpatines or whoever else, the Empire or whatever else. So back in the day, what we find out is that Palpatine was trained by Darth Plagueis. That's where that initial dark side training came from. Okay. This guy wants to see that. He wants to see what happened. He wants to see, this guy's apparently alive the entire time. He wants to see why, when, and how Palpatine killed Darth Plagueis. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, cool? Definitely.
Sweet.
All right, Devin, what else we got?
All right, so Josh Jones writes that he wishes Darth Maul and Qui-Gon didn't die and lasted another episode at least. He did note that, and this is spoiler warning for Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels animated series, we do get to see Darth Maul in Clone Wars and Rebels. And if you play Star Wars Battlefront 2, you get to see him in there as well. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Qui-Gon, unfortunately, had to go. I think it... I mean, maybe not. I don't know. Now I'm questioning everything. I guess I was more okay with that somehow because he died good. You know what I mean? He was still Qui-Gon the best when he died.
Yeah.
But Darth Maul, I want more. I want to know his backstory. I want to know all that stuff. So when Bryce started watching the Clone Wars, he kind of told me a little bit of it, and I really like that.
I don't know. I just feel like they shouldn't have just killed him.
Sure.
It's like I don't know why they went all in on Jar Jar and they didn't go all in on Darth Maul. And I just don't understand why with the same set of eyes you just don't see what Darth Maul is going to become, and you miss what Jar Jar is.
Yeah.
I don't know how you fuck that up. So it would have been probably more practical and a lot more helpful if, and it would have been more painful too. So let's say, Obi-Wan watches Darth Maul kill Qui-Gon, and then, that stupid barrier that's like flipping back and forth or whatever, it's like constantly blocking him. What if that thing, it took a lot longer, and by the, Obi-Wan is stuck there and he has to watch Qui-Gon die. And then before he can get there and get his revenge, he watches Darth Maul escape. And now, the second and third one, as much as it's about Anakin's descent, what if it's also about, the pursuit of Obi-Wan trying to get justice for his fallen master. So I think that would have been a much more interesting way. And then it would have made more sense when they brought him back. Because they brought Darth Maul back anyway and they just gave him robot legs. So it's like... Yeah, it wasn't probably foresight, obviously, and they were just trying to save that character because he was so kick-ass, and everybody was so excited when they brought him back. But they could have skipped all that and had, a lot more interesting stuff in the second and third one if they still had Darth Maul. Like, a fight between Anakin and Darth Maul would have been a lot more evenly matched than, like, Anakin and Dooku, or Anakin and, you know, the other people that he fought. That would have been a cooler story. And, like, you know, we didn't get that. But, you know, what could have been, you know? You're up. What we got next?
All right, the last piece of community feedback we'll leave you with is from Patrick Lepine. I'm really sorry. Like, I'm really sorry.
And actually, this is the first time we've made it this far without having to apologize for butchering names. Typically, historically, on this show, when we get to Writer's Room, we absolutely destroy names because we suck at that. And we apologize every time. So we are sorry, Patrick. But also, you are now a key feature in Retcon Air lore. So welcome.
And like, also, your name's awesome.
It is really quick.
No matter how you pronounce it, it's cool.
Yeah.
He writes, want to say the direction. Directing a child takes serious people skills and patience, but Jake Lloyd was ill-served by a director who is about as far from an actor's director as possible. The pod race was overwrought and tried to match Ben-Hur way too much.
For sure. Even the style of the pod racer that Anakin drove or piloted, or whatever you want to call it, that even, it felt like a chariot. Like, even the way it was the two rockets in front and, like, him in the back, whatever. 100%. I will not argue with that whatsoever. And also, my wife and daughter and I just watched Honey, I Shrunk the Kids tonight. That was, like, the movie we watched before bedtime. And that's
cute.
A heavily driven kid movie. Like, yeah, Rick Moranis is in it. There's some adults in that. But for the most part, it's playing to the kids. And then you think about a movie like Goonies and stuff, or like that movie Super 8. Like Stranger Things, for instance. Kids with the right directors are phenomenal, you know? And I just don't think George Lucas is good at all at working with kids. Like, Short Round from the Indiana Jones, I think that played well because of Steven Spielberg. And I think that's why a lot of the other work that he's done in the Goonies and stuff, I think Steven's great with kids. I think George Lucas was just terrible at trying to explain Jake Lloyd. And I think Jake Lloyd was way too young to be in that role. That's like a big issue that I have with this entire project. I don't know why they picked him.
Yep.
Like, for the life of me. Long story short, he was too young. Anyway.
Yep. I totally agree. I can definitely see that.
All right. Well, enough about the community feedback. Again, thank you for writing in. There was a ton of stuff, but most of the stuff that was in there was just kill Jar Jar. There was one brave guy who said more Jar Jar.
Oh.
There was plenty of Jar Jar. It was just incorrect Jar Jar. Jar Jar just needed retconned in general. So if they ever reboot it, I would like to rewrite with Ahmed Best what we should do with Jar Jar. That would be great.
Yes, that would be so cool.
Enough about them. What about you? What would you retcon, and why wouldst thou retcon it?
All right, I've got 3 things. Number 1, I think the whole, quote, hiding Padme as a handmaid thing was a little... I still can't find the right word for it. I understand things like this have happened in history. I just felt like in this movie it was a little too obvious. Obvious enough that as a young child I watched and I thought, like, this is a little silly. I would have preferred that either everyone with her and around her knew what she was doing or that she didn't do it at all. Plan a decoy, sure, but I didn't understand the haha, no one knew who I was.
Right, and
play.
It was like they needed somebody who was able to spend time with, like, Jake Lloyd. And it was like every time they were together, it was just a really weird dynamic between the two. Because he's like, "Are you an angel? I hear you come from a planet where angels come." I'm like, "You're 9, and I don't typically think 9-year-olds are trying to do that." Yeah,
lay the moves out.
And again, so Jake Lloyd is like 9 or whatever, and Natalie Portman in that movie is like 16, 17, 25. Who knows how old she's actually. But it's just so pedophilic. Is that even a word? Yeah. It just looks so... It just looks so awful. And I don't know why nobody was like, "Hey, George, we need to talk about Jar Jar Binks, Darth Maul, and Jake Lloyd right now." I have no idea why.
Right. Like, we cannot go any further.
Me and the gang talked, like, we're going to go ahead and just close this shit down until you get it together. But all right, so that was your first thing. What's your second thing?
Yep, so I didn't want to steal yours, but I'm going to because you had already written yours before I got to this section. So, the Tooth Sith rule. It just doesn't sit right with me. Brian and I talked about this last night a little bit, and I get the fear of being overthrown. I get that it's a rule from way back in the Star Wars lore. But are you telling me that Palpatine would rather trust a viceroy with his plots than a trained Sith. Like, they would have been so much more powerful, so much more put together if he had had more Sith around him. And if he had feared that one of those people that he trained was going to overthrow him, he could have just killed him. I don't get it.
Yeah, that's fair. And, like, I think, there's been some fan-made trailers and stuff where it's, like, a ton of Sith versus a ton of Jedi. And, like, for me, like, how are you going to have an entire empire and, like, an entire fleet of starships and, like, TIE fighters and stuff all over the place, but there's only 2 Sith? That doesn't make any sense. Why wouldn't you want more generals? Like, the whole Clone Wars, like, each Jedi are generals, and they're all commanding their own, infantry battalions and stuff. Like, it doesn't make sense to not have that built into the Sith Lord. You would want stronger warriors, So, I don't know,
stronger warriors, a stronger connection between the Sith themselves.
And like Jedi Fallen Order touches on this a little bit with like the Inquisitors and there's like former Jedi and stuff that are kind of looped into that, so it's like they were rebranded even. But I just don't understand, Darth Maul, like if you had, Palpatine and Vader and Darth Maul and Dooku and fucking, what was that robot thing, Grievous? Like those are all badass evil things that should be in full force, I agree, the 2 count thing is just insane.
All right, and then my last one is controversial. I'm even like a little bit unsure if I want to talk about it, but I'm going to. I just don't love Vader as the villain of the original trilogy. I don't love Anakin's storyline. I get it. And it's not really part of this movie, so I won't get into the details. I understand the family ties, but I really, truly think Maul would have made a better, more intimidating adversary. Like, that dude's eyes still haunt me to this day.
And, like, there's a point where, like, he unveils the second blade, like, in his like, bow staff, double-bladed lightsaber thing, and he's got, like, the creepiest fucking smile, and it's like, ugh.
Yes.
And and I think you're right, you said it earlier, there's something about seeing your face. And, like, the hoods and the masks, they don't, to me, add fear. Like, your pride in yourself and the fact that you're not hiding yourself. Like, his face was red and black or whatever, but that was his war paint, but you knew exactly who he was and what he looked like. And, he was his own brand icon, and, like, it was awesome. I love that.
Yep.
So, I totally get that, for sure.
Yep. What about you, though? What would you change?
All right, so as I said, my primary issue with this entire thing is the age of Anakin. Even if they rewrote it to make the timeline fit, adjust it either direction, I don't care, but like he should have been the age of Padme. However old Padme is, tone her up, tone her down, I don't give a shit, but like match her. I don't care how hard it is to find the right age actor, you find the right age actor and you put him into play.
Yeah. There are a lot of people on the planet. Come on.
And the jump between Jake Lloyd as a boy and then Hayden Christensen in the second one, like, what I can't, for the life of me, it doesn't make any sense. And then if you aged him up, then when Qui-Gon takes him to the Jedi Council and says, hey, I want to train this boy, when Yoda says he's too old, then it would have made way more sense because, okay, now I'm looking at a 13, 14-year-old boy. Yeah, for sure. Contextually, 100% makes sense.
Yep.
Dude was 9 years old. None of that stuff made sense. I didn't like that at all. It just, things like that made the story just grind a little bit, and I just didn't like it. I'd also make the storytelling something way more interesting than a frigging trade blockade and all these battles with trade federations. It's just ridiculous that like the Sith Lord was able to manipulate UPS in such a way that he took over the entire galaxy for years. I just thought that was really a weird thing to hone in on and make that I don't know. I'm sure that there was like a political issue in our country at the time, and maybe he was trying to parallel it. I don't know. It was just it was just dumb.
Yeah.
Like you, I would ditch the only two Sith rule. I think there should be way more than 2 Sith. I want to see an army of Sith. And then for funsies, if I could write like an alternative universe piece, I'd want specifically Mace Windu to train Anakin at the Jedi Temple. I think Anakin was full of fear and sadness. I think Mace Windu would have been a strong voice in his life to help him find his strength and courage when he needed it. I also think Mace Windu would have probably made immediate changes to get his mom back from Watto immediately and back with Anakin. Like, I do not understand, again, so this entire, episode I've been complaining about how stupid the Jedi is. I just don't understand why nobody on the council was like, hey, we weren't going to bring you on, but now that clearly Obi-Wan is going to, we're going to go ahead and take care of your mom, knowing how big of a pain point that would be for you. Yoda's sitting there, he's saying, like, I sense deep fear in you. and like sadness, and he's like, yeah, I'm sad about losing my mom. I'm afraid that she's gonna die. And why wasn't Yoda like, oh, I've been alive for like 900 years. I've probably got some coin tucked away. We have this barracks that's not in use. Why don't we get your mom over here? Like that would have solved so many problems. But again, there are things that you can't do, right? Because you need the movies to span another trilogy, so you need it all to fall apart. So I get that wouldn't work out. I love the idea of, an Anakin Skywalker that's like cool and like, like more humble, but then like, him and Mace are like staying up until like the late hours, like talking about like lore, and they talk about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. And so then when Palpatine starts going really hardcore after him, now you have Anakin who's way more open with Mace Windu about what's happening. Like it would have, if the Jedi were, as wise as they claim to be, like that would have been great.
Yeah. So when I read, what you wrote here, I was like, it was like a light bulb. Like I think that is such a great idea. Like if Anakin could have had Mace, like I think everything would have been different.
I agree, because like the entire rest of this first prequel trilogy, there's so much contention between the two, and like when the Chancellor like puts Anakin on the council, we agree that you're on the council, but we do not grant you the rank of master. If you could have removed all that tension and stuff, it would have been a much more interesting, mentorship thing that he would have gotten when he missed out from Qui-Gon. But we didn't get that.
Right.
Life is pain. So any other thoughts before we shut this beast down, Shelby Fitch?
No, sir.
All right. Well, then let's put this baby to bed. Shelby, thank you for hanging out with me today.
Of course.
Folks at home, thank you for listening to Shelby and I break down Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. You are more than welcome to check us out on Twitter via @Retcon Air. We do a lot of work on Facebook as well, facebook.com/Retcon Air. Obviously, in addition to Spotify, iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartMedia, and wherever the hell else this is in the podcast form, we've been doing a lot more like Let's Plays and tutorials and stuff like that on YouTube. And so if you're into videos, you can check us out on YouTube. Just search Retcon Air. You'll find us pretty easily. And then there's some stuff in the pipeline, just to let you know. I'm working on Retcon reviews. I just did The Last of Us, like I said in the intro, and I'm really excited to talk about it. Neither Shelby nor Briar have played it yet, and instead of waiting forever, I'm going to do like a short review on it just to talk about it because there's so much controversy. And then Shelby, do you want to talk about what you're working on?
Yeah, so I'm going to be, when I finally force myself to sit down and do this, because I'm so excited about it, I just haven't sat down to do it. I'm going to be talking a little bit about books that I've read, because I'm a book nerd through and through, and I finished up Dune the other day, which is a thick boy. I don't know if any of you have seen that book.
Nice, no.
But it's a thick boy. And I absolutely loved it, and there is like a black hole in my heart because I don't have anyone to talk to about it, so I'm going to do Retcon Reads, where I break down a novel that I've recently read and kind of look more for feedback from you guys.
See, so we're going to give you a podcast episode on the 1st and the 15th of every single month, like we always will. And then we're going to give you Let's Plays and reaction videos as stuff comes up, because there's always fun stuff to talk about. We're going to start doing reviews and Retcon Reads. So I hope you understand that we're fully dedicated to making sure that there's a variety of products that you're able to check out that might suit you. We're hoping that you at least click with one of the hosts. We hope that you find one of the stories that you like, or that you find one of the pieces of content that we create, either video or podcast or otherwise, that you do resonate with, so you like it. So if you're listening or watching any of the things that we make on Facebook or anywhere that you're watching or listening to, if you could, we would really appreciate it if you would give us some feedback. Give us some reviews or positive feedback on iTunes or wherever you're able to give feedback. We just really appreciate it. There's a lot of other podcasts out there, and we just want to make sure that we're able to share our stories as well. I think what we do is awesome. I think we work really hard on it, and I just want to make sure that people have the opportunity to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for us. That's it for this episode of Retcon Air. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will see you next time.
See ya.